Alright, so I was working on another script that was about the Blight Victim, and it was kind of an evolution of Plush Victim, where I was wondering, wow, I wonder if you could mix multiple theories of the Blight Victim to try and make one more coherent timeline. Specifically just with the question like, hey, does the Blight Victim have to have one linear basic answer to his character and how he works? Then, I came back to the idea of Mike being haunted by the Blight Victim. I'm sure this has some kind of name, maybe like something like Mike is possessed or Mike possession or something like that, but I realized this weirdly can tie into a lot of versions of the timeline, and it specifically plays on mechanics and concepts that were later introduced in the series that could justify this theory a little bit better than I originally thought. Firstly, the idea of someone being possessed or followed or interacting with a spirit is far from out there at this point in the series. Between the short story You Are the Band, or in the FNAF movie with the Golden Child following Mike into his dreams and manipulating them to talk to him, etc., or the simplest example of the Stitch Ray Stingers in Man in Room 1280 having Andrew haunt Afton. If we walk back to the issues I've had with a lot of Blight Victim theories, I realized a lot of them could be explained with Mike being the first thing that the Blight Victim possesses. Keyword first thing. Think about what points in the timeline where the Blight Victim is explicitly relevant or proven to exist in. He's directly linked to Happiest Day, which would be towards the end of the timeline, either in 3 or 6, depending on what point the series is occurring in. If we are setting up that minigame, it must mean that all the criteria are there, which means Charlie should be around in the near future, or just straight up there. We also have Cassidy interacting with the Blight Victim in the logbook, which the logbook makes it clear that this is supposed to be after Sister Location, which is a weird thing to distinguish. That would imply this version of events is meant to occur loosely around, once again, 3 or 6, which are both after Sister Location. But one of the weirder parts of the logbook that's always bugged me and I never really had a good answer for was, why is this the first time the Blight Victim is interacting with Cassidy? There's no one theory that justifies this completely. In normal versions of the whole Mike possession thing that are different than this theory I'm about to get into, Mike has interacted with Golden Freddy, or at least has the potential to interact with Golden Freddy in FNAF 1, and also has been around the pizzerias in general for years. Him being linked to any animatronics, whether that be Golden Duo or Shatter Victim, have a bit of a worse version of this issue. Even while he was still fragmented, Andrew could interact with Jake just fine. And in the logbook, the Blight Victim was capable of basic responses to Cassidy, which implies that at some point in the timeline, the Blight Victim is capable of interacting with the spirits around him. Since you don't need all parts to be together to help a spirit be assembled, at least in the novels, it would be strange if Cassidy's capable of interacting with him, assuming they either shared a vessel for Golden Duo or Shatter Victim, or the Golden Freddy suit was linked to the Blight Victim's memories, or any version of that kind of idea. The Blight Victim should be at least intact enough to interact with, or at least it should be possible to help assemble him and get him ready to be talked to, especially given the fact that they have 30 years to do this. However, it's happening after Sister Location for some reason. Once again, that's what's weird about this. And of course, any theory that has him split amongst multiple vessels has the question of why? How does he link to suits that he never interacted with on screen that should be miles away from him in the hospital? That's an issue often raised with Golden Duo, and it's an issue that exists with Memory Victim and Shatter Victim-esque theories. How does he get from point A to point B? See, another issue I had that ended up being very helpful for this theory was that almost all examples of one character haunting another thing, such as You're the Band or the FNAF movie, typically had the character possessing or interacting with another living vessel have a concrete thing they're already haunting. Goldilocks in the movie is already haunting Fredbear. In the novels, all the kids are still haunting their animatronics, and those animatronics are physically being split apart to shatter and split them apart even further. While Andrew is not confirmed to have any possessed vessel or thing he's attached to, he still is split up because of physical actions that happen in the real material world. Him dying didn't just magically shatter his soul, but conveniently, we have a character who does have some interesting mechanics when it comes to how his soul worked. Prior to becoming the Stitch Wraith, Jake possessed the Simon doll, but it was largely inactive for about 2 years based on how the Stingers talk about Jake's death. However, the moment Simon's head is attached to the Stitch Wraith endoskeleton, he is shot back to life with complete control and awareness, admittedly with some minor amnesia at the start where he slowly remembers more and more about himself as the Stingers go on. And later, this kind of happens again with Larson, particularly between the agony trying to kill him and Jake trying to heal him. He sort of goes in and out of the ball pit memory dimension while also having linked thoughts to Jake sometimes. At least that's what I remember it being. I might have to double check that between recordings. But that specifically part about Jake being jolted awake when he had a proper vessel to inhabit makes me wonder about Mike's story. Right before the bite victim dies, on his deathbed, Michael apologizes, implying he is there in the room right as the bite victim flatlines. If you do not need to be a perfect vessel to be inhabited, that means Mike should be a target of haunting here, or at least is within the room and vicinity to be haunted. However, Mike doesn't have metal or remnant. Technically, people have iron in their bloods, but we're assuming that doesn't count because of how small in quantity it is. This is why the bite victim just kind of succumbs and fades into the void. He's technically possessing something, but it's not really a proper vessel. Flash forward quite a while later, and we have the events of Sister Location, where Michael gets scooped. The scooper specifically injects things with remnant, which in the Stitch Ray Singers is specifically described as a conductor for soul energy. Not to mention, he is literally worn by a bunch of metal wires that are possessed by previous characters. If the bite victim was dormant up to this point, now there's a ton of active material for the bite victim's soul to kind of sloop on into. We know Mike has some amount of remnant still in him, given the fact that he is able to be alive and exist, despite being basically just a pile of skin, which is how we get our bite victim in the events of the logbook. If the bite victim was linked to the remnant that was in him prior, there you go. It explains why the logbook was specifically chosen to be after Sister Location. And it also explains why it was Mike's logbook in the first place. Think about how many times souls are depicted as interacting that isn't related to some arbitrary thing like an activity book. Think of how many minigames there are. We had characters interacting in the source codes of various FNAF 6 teasers. Hell, if you're in the Stitchline Games crowd, we have souls just straight up interacting openly in books without any ambiguity. Why was it so important that the narrative framing device of this book was that it was an activity book owned by Michael? Because if all that was important out of this was seeing two ghosts interact, why couldn't we just have had them interact? Why not make it a minigame in FNAF 6 or make it another source code teaser for Ultimate Custom Night or something like that? Why make Mike involved with this book at all? Why not just have the book exist? Now, I will say this concept works very well with Alter S in my opinion, as if Cassidy is around wherever William is going trying to figure out what happened to their friends, because he's the one who dismantled them, that being the idea of the updated Alter S, or you can go with the classic Vengeful Alter S, where they're sort of hunting down William, biding their time, whatever. If Cassidy was specifically in FNAF 3 removed from the other kids, then you can have them interacting with Michael, and thus you have the bite victim near Michael. Then under Alter S, this would be the first time the bite victim is able to interact with another sentient spirit. And also explains why he's still having foggy memories, but it's enough to be like, oh yeah, the party was for me. He's getting there, but he's slowly getting back there, just like Jake did. This also adds an interesting plot reason for the bite victim to be necessary for Happiest Day, because why is it his memories? Why are the things from his death week so important to connect to these kids, while a lot of Shatter Victim memory victims have him split apart amongst the memories of the kids or stuff like that, or have his memories be used to help the kids? The why is always there as a question for those kind of theories. But in this case, we're almost looking at it from the opposite perspective. He was never shattered. He was completely whole inside of Michael and then sort of activated. Now he's only really split between two things, the bit of remnant in Michael and a lot of it in Molten Freddy. This justifies why he is sentient in the logbook when the main 4 MCI kids aren't. And what would be so important about him? His brains aren't hash browns from being scooped a ton of times over the years in the scooping room, or however long they were down in the bunker. He has a direct link to these souls. And once again, another advantage of Alter S is that we have a mechanical reason that Cassidy can't just fix everything himself. If Cassidy is still a separate spirit and is not a part of Molten Freddy, but the bite victim is, then he would be the only sentient spirit physically attached to those kids, meaning no one else at this point in the series could help them directly. When you combine the two, there's really no one else in the series who could do what he would need to do here, which I think explains the role of Cassidy a little bit better in this case. Why is Cassidy just kind of talking to the bite victim, or maybe doing something in FNAF World to enable him to do more stuff in Happiest Day, depending on who Spooky Eyes is in FNAF World? Well, like I said, they can't do it. The bite victim is relatively new to all of this, but he needs to be the one to do it, so it's all on him. All Cassidy can do is help the part that they have. It's still a little bit of a plot hole for Cassidy to need the bite victim if they're both in Molten Freddy, as well as a plot hole that wouldn't have just helped the other kids already. But hey, take that up with classic Molten MCI. So the timeline would basically go, the bite victim dies, possesses Mike, Mike gets injected with remnant and is warned by the Ennard. The bite victim is sort of woken up but is confused. Cassidy starts to help him remember and then helps him figure out what he even can do about all of it. And then uses his link with the MCI kids. Once again, under Alter S, it's just the original 4, which is what we see in Happiest Day in FNAF World. Or under Classic Molten MCI, you can just make the argument that Cassidy doesn't need to be specifically helped. It's only the main 4 who are broken and messed up, similar to how the original novels had Michael Brooks still be sentient despite the other kids being messed up. Flash forward to 6, where Charlie is finally there to help finish the party, and you can have either bite victim receiver or Cassidy receiver. That lets you do your memory or shadow victim-esque concepts, and you can work it a variety of ways. Now, you might argue that the bite victim being bonded to the MCI kids would create the problem I mentioned in the Alter S video about how Molten Freddy should be able to track anything it's linked to, because that's how it worked in Andrew and Jake's situation in Frights. However, that assumes Molten Freddy has a sentient soul to track them down. We don't really know if a non-sentient group of characters can track down their other vessels. It's only really a problem if Cassidy is part of Molten Freddy and is sentient as seen in the logbook. But hey, if you didn't have a problem with that version of classic Molten MCI to begin with, who cares? But hey, under Alter S, Cassidy isn't part of the amalgam and is just a separate spirit, so it doesn't really matter. Maybe you could argue this plot hole exists with Elizabeth, where she could track down where Mike is and when. But A, she doesn't want to kill Mike to our knowledge. She kills us by mistake in 6, but even that could be argued like, oh, shouldn't she know who she's attacking if she has the remnant of that person? But also that's assuming the remnant in the scooper also has Elizabeth's, but she's fairly sentient and aware in Sister Location, which might imply she hasn't been scooped as much, or might not even have had her remnant fully taken out of her, if at all. And the remnant that brings Mike to life is at bare minimum the MCI kids, so kind of questionable if what Mike has would even include her. In fact, given the fact that she doesn't know who she's attacking till the very moment does kind of imply that he doesn't have a remnant at all. Not to mention she also isn't in the logbook. The point I've been going back and forth on is, why is Molten Freddy aggressive in 6? I mentioned that this might be a plot hole in the previous video, but that's mainly because Cassidy is a very unique spirit to most other characters. We know that Molten Freddy was able to overpower Elizabeth and eject her from the group, but Elizabeth is a single sentient spirit against a minimum of 4 very aggressive, albeit very unfocused spirits. Whereas Cassidy is a spirit that they are all very familiar with and have been around for quite a long time, and Golden Freddy, other than maybe the puppet, is almost always depicted as the most threatening or capable spirit. And we know from the Citrus Stingers that even if you're not the dominant spirit in control, you can very much manipulate the spirit if you are part of it. However, I don't think a bite victim is a factor in Molten Freddy's aggressiveness at all, mainly because he is basically a paper tiger standing before a Godzilla typhoon. We know from the logbook that he is blind and can only hear sounds, and also that he is scared. And honestly, given the fact that this is what the kids' worlds look like, and their mind probably consists of mostly kill William, kill William, kill William, birthday cake, kill William, kill William, I wouldn't blame him for being scared and not having much agency over their actions. Maybe the 4 could overpower Cassidy, and that could be used to slightly escape the question of why is Molten Freddy still aggressive if Cassidy was there. But I don't think the bite victim's really a factor in that at all. I don't know what he could do other than try to help them and free them, which seems like to be the endgame of his storyline. Also, the more I thought about it, I realized that Alter S further allows the time frame to make even more sense for Molten Freddy. If the bite victim is woken up, there's not much he can do prior to meeting an extra spirit like Cassidy to help him understand what's going on. He can't see, and he's effectively overpowered. We also know that 6 is relatively close to the events of 3, or at least seem to be in a similar year or time frame, which further makes this timeline make a little bit more sense. 3 would basically be a turning point where the bite victim finally starts to learning what the hell he's supposed to do and making some headway, and by the end of 6, the spirits are ready to move on, rather than having a Cassidy who just kind of is lazy and doesn't do nearly as much as they should, or having the bite victim have 30 years of being connected to these suits and characters and doing jack shit. Also, interestingly, this completely works with the original FNAF 4 games. Now, we're still missing the fundamental implication of who Mike was, but if the idea was that we were the bully who grew up later to become Mike Schmidt or the FNAF 3 guard, then we have a very simple narrative for the original games. Michael bullies his younger brother, gets him killed, is haunted by him. Maybe this is the cause for the original nightmares before we had the whole dittophobia sister location experiment stuff. Time passes and he grows up to be the security guard. Across the series, William kills his various kids, ultimately becoming Springtrap and ending up in FNAF 6. The First Fright's crew finds the shells and puts them all up as props everywhere. Michael returns, the game happens, the fire happens, the spirit gets closure, and the bite victim is able to find new friends and move on and all that good stuff. Maybe Michael also dies in the fire. Now, that version doesn't have the whole remnant swooping soul shenanigans I talked about earlier, but also none of that was really established at all in the original 4 games. It also makes FNAF World more just clarification of that point, and also implies why we, the player, are at all interfacing with any minigames in FNAF 3. If the bite victim is connected to us, the ghost of the bite victim interacts with the kids while Mike in the real world is dealing with Springtrap, which would ultimately kind of resolve with Mike being finally able to either move on as in die, maybe die in the fire, or just be free of his brother haunting him and the guilt that hangs over him. But to step back a bit to the overall topic, I do think there's a lot of potential in this theory. It's still not enough for me to be like, confirmed, solved. Right now as writing this, I'm like, it could be strong or implied. But then again, like, every bite victim theory could be strong or implied. Like, I feel like if the bite victim had said, like, oh, I'm following my brother around, then obviously we wouldn't be having this video or theory in the first place. It would just be kind of a universally accepted fact. Though as is, I can't figure out something this wouldn't explain. Why do we have 2 spirits interacting in an activity book? Because one of those spirits is bound to the owner of that book. Partially. When and how does this kid end up linking to the main 4 kids? What does he get from the hospital all the way to these kids and souls and all that shenanigans? Why is this character only in the later parts of the series being acknowledged? What is special about him? Why is he relevant to them? All of those questions get answered with this sort of fusion chimera of the theories. Now, I don't really have a stupid name for this theory like I do with a lot of them. Okay, it's 1 a.m. and I just finished editing this entire video, and I only now looked up what the name of this theory is. Or at least more or less what the theory is called. The idea of Mike being followed by the bite victim is called follow victim. I should have guessed that based on how this theory community works. But technically this is an asterisk because it technically kind of becomes shadow victim, memory victim-esque, but even that's not 100% accurate. But hey, if I'm going to make a stupid name for a theory, it's going to be something like follow victim shatter mode.